hello. It's time for another little bit of orchestration. Today is from Sevsay's Cambridge Guide to Orchestration, and this one is Score and Analysis number 38, Rimsky Korsakov, Scheherazade, second movement. It's just 10 bars, that's it, but it's enough to exemplify what's going on. So let us try and find the place in question. I won't show you that score, I'll show you this score, which I think I've done it so that it is not transposing. So if I just go back again to do that, yeah, it's in B minor. We've got a dominant pedal going on, and chromaticism and various other bits and pieces as well. So let me play it for you again, and I will hopefully play it and you can just watch it. Here we go. That's it. That's all there is to it. It's a really interesting one. I'll play it also on the Note Performer version. Very, very different. Which will be totally the wrong speed. Yeah, it's just crazy, isn't it? Trouble is, it's very difficult to know how to slow it all down. So at the moment it's dotted crotch equals 80, so I think dotted crotch equals 70 is probably more like it. So let's do a sort of bracket there. One of those is going to come up on a different screen. Dot equals, let's try 70. Let's see if it's anywhere it's similar. No, it's still sort of a lot quicker. Let's try 60. So this particular, oh, hello, just started again. So this particular thing is a really interesting one because we've got, this is the reduction of the piece. So it starts at bar 349, this particular thing. And yes, so let me just leave it there for a minute, just to sort of have a look at what's going on. So we've got sort of three clearly defined roles here. We've got a melody, which is in 1, 2, 3 octave layers. So sort of 2 octaves apart. We've got a bass pedal tone, but it's also a pedal which is not just the bass. So we'll also have here in the double bass and bassoon 2, we've got that in horns 2 and 4, and that in horns 1 and 3. We've also got that, and this is just called a counter line, really, or the pedal line. We've got this also as oboe 2 and clarinet 2 and flute 2. So we've got that element. We've got this element, which is a subsidiary line, which is doubled up on the bassoon. And then we've got the main tune, which is mostly in the wind, but we've got one bit of the strings, so a slight blend at this point as well. Then in the second half at 3-5-4, we've got a completely different sort of spacing going on, because the melody is now going to be in the violas, which is quite difficult to see on here actually, but let me just sort of, there we go, like that. I'll explain what all that red stuff is in a minute, with 1 octave doubling, so 2 octave layers, but just 1 octave between them basically, where you've got sort of oboe 1, clarinet 1 as well. This time the subsidiary line, or the chromatic line, and also not forgetting that the bassoon is actually joining the viola at that point. The other line is also in the same register, so it's interesting to see how that works. And you'll notice that the roles have slightly changed. So we'll go through all of this. In terms of brass, the pedal function of the brass is very clear. We've just got horns. The trumpets double up, so trumpet 1, trumpet 2 is playing at the same note as the horns 1 and 3, and then horns 2 and 4 were there. So we got sort of doubling up on that particular pitch. But as you can see, it's sort of pretty much doing the same thing. The trumpets just add a little bit of octave, basically, onto that at that point, which is really interesting. So what does Sevsay say about it? He says, so the exercise is about Rimsky and his importance to orchestration, the technique of individualizing coexisting lines. Let's just do that. Using different or differing instrumental techniques, the importance of employing differing orchestral and instrumental registers, and pedal tones that maintain stability. So it says, although Rimsky-Korsakov's style is one of separation of function, he also used mixed colours, but adhered more to Mozart's transparency. So in other words, not too much going on. He also pioneered various new techniques as well. And in this particular thing, we've got two sections of music, each with slightly different elements. The instrumentation stays mainly the same, with the exception of the piccolo in section 1, the addition of trumpets in section 2. So here we've got piccolo, which then cuts out here, and then it's not there anymore. That's minus piccolo. And then we gain trumpets at that point. So I should probably just do trumpet 1 and 2 there as well. So we gain those. So section 1, bars 349 to 353. So basically this section here, all of that. And then section 2 is the bit that comes after that. So the melody, as I said, is in 2 octaves with mixed colours. So we've got piccolo, flute 1, oboe 1, clarinet 1, and violin 1. And the reason for including the violins, he says here, is to reduce the extreme contrast if melody was only in the woodwind. So you will see that we have got a violin playing this main tune. Like that. So that is the main melody. And if we go to here, we can also see how it looks on the orchestral page as well. Let me just sort of go out. So we've got violin 1 there, we've got clarinet 1, we've got oboe 1, and then an octave higher than those. So the oboe and the clarinet playing the same notes. Then an octave higher than that they are with the violin. An octave higher than that is the flute, and then an octave higher than that is the piccolo, and the piccolo drops out at the end of that little section. So let's go back to here. The counter melody is unison viola and cello, then violin 2 and viola as the register must take precedence there. So what does that mean? So it means that they're sharing the same notes at this point. So that's sort of F sharp 3. And you'll notice that the cello cuts out at that point, and then the second violins that haven't been playing there now join in. Like that, and they carry on. And you'll also notice that the bassoon that shadows, this is sort of melodic shadowing, it's a type of heterophonic idea, where you've got both the bassoon lines and the cello. So the bassoon is just iterating the separate notes of each grouping, but it doesn't continue because in the 19th century that note was impossible on a bassoon, so it doesn't do that. And also our oboes are already employed in the pedal tone idea as well, which is all of this bit, with a little bit of light harmony right at the end where it sort of cadences. So that's that. And also he says that the bassoon has a sort of rather neutral sound but blends with the cello and the viola. Fair enough. Then the bass pedal tone, mixed colour, flute 2, oboe 2, we've done this, clarinet 2, horns 1, 2, 3, 4, bassoon 2 and double bass. So all of that is there. So then in section 2, and I will come on to some other things in a minute, is not 3,200, it's 354 to 358. So it says here the melody, 1 octave and mixed colour, oboe 1, clarinet 1, bassoon 1 and viola. So the 2 lines overlap briefly and the melody is condensed to 1 octave. So I said to emphasise the register from 4 lines to 2 lines, or the register drop which is from 4 lines to 2 lines. So in other words, here we've got a sort of extreme register, and then we've just got that. That's what the violas are playing as well. And we can see that there's a sort of voice crossing happening at that point as well. So it's a really interesting sort of bit of polyphony at this point. And the counter melody is unison, then in octaves. So it starts off here with just the violins in unison. Whoops, let me try and get to it. Then it goes into octaves. And you'll notice that the flute is actually doing the melodic shadowing at that point as well, which is this. So interestingly enough, and you can see clearly a bit more that the flute is overshadowing or shadowing melodically the violins at that point. So the bass pedal tone is now in 3 octaves in mixed colour. So we sort of swapped functions a little bit. So now it's trumpets 1 and 2, oboe 2, clarinet 2, horn 1 and 2, bassoon 2, and the cello and double bass, which is sort of all doing that cello bit. And he just says pedal tones maintain the framework where the other instrumentation changes. The tones create a common colour, and the absence of other elements maintains transparency. In other words, there's no attempt to sort of fill up anything else in the texture. It's already complicated enough as it is. There's no need. Another thing was that I found it sometimes quite helpful to go to the New York Philharmonic Orchestral Archives to have a look at the parts, because it's very telling, and they differ quite a bit from what Rimsky actually wrote. So anything in red are sort of things like new bowing or slightly different articulation. So, for example, you'll see here in the viola part, that slur doesn't exist at the end, because I think whoever did it probably is a he, in the 1960s and 70s, sadly, they wanted a different articulation for the last beat, and so the bow changes. But there is a consistency of bowing. So the bowing is also marked not by Rimsky Korsakov. This is the bow marking in the score, which obviously you wouldn't write as a composer. You would just leave it to the players to sort out, really, probably. Although it is sometimes helpful. But you'll notice that, interestingly enough, when the bit here happens, it's all one bar to one bow. Whereas then when the violins come in, actually it becomes every grouping to one bow. And I wonder whether that's and you can't really tell, because of course players are very, very good. They can disguise it. And I have seen it written differently in 2 different editions where they do bow the whole thing as well. So all of those red markings are bowing changes and also dynamic changes as well. So in fact, although it's marked mezzo forte, they actually play piano in that line here, particularly the trumpet, which could be quite piercing, and not forgetting that actually we've also got that going on as well. So let's see how that is treated, because that could be a danger point. You know, often when you have a note that's not part of the melody, but it's interfering with a melody, that can be a bit of a danger point. But let's not forget that the doubling really is mainly in the strings and the bassoon, rather than this sort of top line an octave higher. Let me see whether I can try and find it for you. So coming up. Yeah. Did you hear that? Boom, ba. There's a sort of weird delay effect at that point. Yeah, interesting that our ear is drawn to the lower octave, not the higher octave at that point, because I think they're probably just more of the strings at that point, even though it's just viola and bassoon and a couple of wind. Isn't that interesting how that sort of works? But I wonder whether, you know, most conductors ask the brass to come down a little bit at that particular point as well. And then there's a slight difference in articulation, which corresponds with the written wind one, where they do actually slur all the way to the end. There's a sort of slightly different passage that comes after that. Where we have a continuation actually of viola and then wind doing the main melody, and then the strings do a sort of tremolo function, and then the lower strings, the cello and the double basses, do this sort of arpeggiated function as well. So it's a nice example of the sort of transparency that you get in Rimsky Korsakov. Not a massively overly complicated thing, because there's none of that sort of divizzy stuff. One thing that I did want to sort of have a look at is this bit here. Where they've actually got quite an awkward triple stop. So you would have to play your fourth finger on the D, second finger on the F sharp, and first finger on the B, probably. There might be different ways of doing it, but I think that's probably what you'd do. And you'll get that sort of brum. It's very cleverly disguised. I wonder whether in performance, whether they don't do that and they actually just divide, so that you might have one player doing the B and the D, and then the next player just taking the F sharp. But I haven't seen it marked like that in the score. In the parts, it is marked as a treble stop. So it's interesting, but you don't really get to sort of hear any difference of like this scrunch. Let's just try again. A little bit. You can just about hear a little bit there, but it's very difficult because, of course, this is coming in at that point. So you might sort of think, well, is it really necessary to have that F sharp there? It probably isn't really, but it does occur again where there isn't an F sharp played at that point. And notice that the function, there's another overlap of the melody and this bit, but of course that's okay because we've got sort of 3 other octaves going on as well at that point. So I think that was just it. And then they also come down to piano, where we want the melody to shine through a little bit, and so they've marked them down in the parts, which is interesting. Another bit of sort of performance practice that might change from whatever the composer wrote, which I always think is interesting. And in fact, even in oboe 1, it's marked solo, like that as well. Interesting that you don't really get to hear those flutes at all, but it's still somewhat blended with what's going on here. So even though you don't really hear it, it does blend still, and it maintains consistency with what happens. The flutes basically go up to the different octave at the end as well. So a little short one for today, but I thought it was an interesting one nonetheless. Yes, I shall leave that with you. And look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks again.